What is going on, guys? DragonTamerBlayde here, back from our Elder Scrolls Legends, and today we are in the peak, we are in the max, we have reached Isle of Madness spoiler season, the hype is in full force, so we're going to do what we usually do, since there's 55 cards in this expansion, I think. We're going to review them in batches as they get revealed, so we're going to talk about 6 more that are revealed today, that were revealed yesterday up to today, and we'll give our thoughts. I'm going to start trying something a little bit new. I'm still going to talk over my opinions, some synergy, stuff like that. But I'm also going to try assigning a star system. I've seen a lot of Hearthstone YouTubers do stuff like this. Basically, 5 stars is like crazy bonkers cards will create new decks on its own, will change the meta on its own. Amazing. 4 is just like really, really good card. Fits into an existing deck and makes it better. Can stand on its own. 3 is like solid card, maybe solid arena pick. Doesn't do anything crazy, but can fit into some regular decks. 2 is probably like meme or just doesn't have the support yet, and 1 is utter trash. So without further ado, let's get on into it. First one we're going to talk about is Thadon, the Duke of Mania. 6 cost 6/7 in willpower. This lane becomes Mania at the start of each player's turn. If they have the creature with the highest health in this lane, they draw a card. So we've already confirmed that Mania does not overwrite the Shadow lane, but it will overwrite other lanes. So if there is a Dementia lane, which we'll get to in a minute, in effect, Mania will override Dementia, I believe. So as a card, cost 6/7 is it's fine, but you kind of want an effect on turn 6 for it to really matter. So this card is really going to be judged on the lane effect. This lane becomes Mania. So if you have the highest health in the lane, they draw a card. I can see some sort of slower, beefier spell sword type of thing. Getting extra card draw out of this card just for having the biggest health in the lane over and over again. Maybe even some sort of like Portcullis, High Hrothgar type of deck that cares about health. But again, that's very memey. The true application is probably going to be like a traditional control deck that hits the late game and then gets some extra card draw from this lane effect, whereas most of their faster opponents won't have the health to compete with them. Do I think that's fine? I think it's probably fine. I don't think you can really truly build a deck around this lane or this effect unless there's other ways to apply a Mania lane. So for that reason, I'm going to give this card like a 2.5, 3 stars. I think it probably fits into some decks we currently have. I don't think it's good enough to really make anything else relevant again. And being a one-of, you can't really truly build around this card, so it has to slot into a deck. So for that reason, we'll give it like a 2.5 to a 3. Next card we're going to talk about is the Gatekeeper. 5 cost 6/6 Daedra. This guy's the guy from the Crushing Blow art. He has guard, and only 1 creature in this lane can attack per turn. So obviously this is a very solid card. It's overstated for its cost, which is usually a good sign. It has guard, which is a pretty awesome keyword to have around. And this effect works in the types of decks that you probably would want this card in. So I picture this card in some purple-focused kind of mid-rangey deck that's going to plop down 1 fat card per turn. So like a Dream Curve of Mammoth into Bleak Coast into Gatekeeper. Only problem is you can't attack with all those cards at once. So it has a little bit of anti-synergy in that regard. But if you think about like plopping this down against like your aggro opponent or like your tokens opponent, this card can like absolutely shut them down and just murder their hopes and dreams. So it's probably even better in like a control deck than it is the aforementioned fat purple creature curve deck. But this card is still pretty solid for anything where you're trying to be slower than your opponent or focusing on just 1 or 2 big creatures per lane at a time rather than going super wide. And I think there's a fair amount of support for that. Those decks aren't incredibly powerful at the moment, but I think enough of those decks exist. I think this card is really, really good in Arena. Not like game-breaking in Arena, but I think this card is really solid overall. It's not super flashy, but this effect right here could shut down a lot of your opponents. It won't do anything to like absolutely nullify things like a late game conscription, but at that point your 5-drop really isn't going to counter conscription anyway. This is more for like your tokens, to an extent your aggro warrior, although they have some bigger things that can contest this as well. Something like a catapult can kind of take Gatekeeper out pretty well, but in other draws where you're not facing a catapult or like a, it's really, they call it mid-range sorcerer, but it's really like an aggro sorcerer. This card can do a lot of work. So for that reason, I'd give this card like a 3 to 3.5 stars. I think this is a pretty solid card. It's not going to change the game, but it can be, I can see it being pretty impactful. Next card we have from Aeolus. We've got Cloak and Dagger. It's a split item card, which is pretty sweet. I've seen a lot of people online referring to this card as Steel Scimitar cut in half that costs more. Which on one hand, that is true. Because to get the full 2/2, you have to spend both cards and 2 Magicka. But I think this card has a little bit more to it than that. So first things first. This card is great with Treasure Hunt. Something like the, what's he called? The 2-cost 3/2 in red. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but that has Treasure Hunt, give an item +1/+1. It has been confirmed that the Treasure Hunt will hit both of these items. So if you draw this card with Treasure Hunt, you have a 1-cost +1/+3 and a 1-cost +3/+1. So Treasure Hunt hitting this card makes it absolutely bonkers. Obviously, it gets even more bonkers if you have multiple Treasure Hunts on the board. So this is a solid card for Treasure Hunt. I also think it's a solid card for items decks in general. One of the bigger problems item decks have is clogging the deck up with too many items to make sure you can like proc all of your item synergy. So being able to get 2 items out of this one card, I think, is not something that you want to ignore. So there's obvious synergy with the Rehad brothers. You could give the Cloak to the Rehad Battle Mage if you want, so it'll be a +5 health and guard. And you can give the Dagger to the Horseman to get +5 attack and breakthrough, or you can mix and match if you want to make both creatures more balanced. But there's also other things of like, as I'm dropping down, maybe I'm playing Dragonstar Riders, maybe I'm playing Whirling Duelist, or even just multiple things hitting multiple Gardeners of Swords, whatever. Having more cards is never a bad thing. And when you think about how easily you can reduce the cost of these with a skilled blacksmith, that kind of reduces the cost of having to play 1 extra Magicka. But even then, at that point, I don't think you're carrying as much. Like I mentioned before, I think being able to increase the consistency of your items deck to draw better while also still having that critical mass of items to trigger all your synergies, I think makes paying that 1 extra Magicka occasionally worth it. Just because, like I said, paying 1 extra Magicka to put 2 of these on a Dragonstar Rider means you're drawing 1 extra card. And are you willing to pay 1 Magicka for a card? Yeah, I think you would be. So obviously, if you just want stats, Steel Scimitar is your best bet. And maybe you still run Steel Scimitar alongside this card. But if you're a deck that's really focused on item synergies, I think this deck, in a lot of cases, not all cases, but a lot of cases, can be better than Steel Scimitar for those item synergies I mentioned before. For that reason, I'm actually going to give this card like a solid 3 stars. I don't think it quite makes any decks or makes items decks broken, but it's kind of fitting into a slot that items decks have been like sorely hoping for, so I think it's a nice addition for them. Next card we're going to talk about is the, I guess, opposite of the Mania lane we talked about before. We've got Syl, the Duchess of Dementia, 6-cost 7/6 in red, also a Wood Elf, and her effect is this lane becomes Dementia. The Dementia effect is if you have the highest attack at the start of your turn in that lane, you deal 3 damage to your opponent. So this card's kind of in a weird spot. Like, if I saw that this card costs like 4, something like that, I think this card would be absolutely insane. Aggro decks could use this to push an extra 3 damage per turn. I just don't think that is as likely on turn 6 for an aggro deck to have the highest attack in the lane, and paying 6 Magicka for a what is essentially do nothing this turn doesn't feel great for any aggressive deck. So it would have to be... This would fit better, I think, into a kind of like the aggro warrior kind of thing, where it can go a little bit longer, and some of those cards are a little bit beefier with your mammoths and your Bleak Coast Trolls and your Sowers of Revenge, and occasionally your Woodark Headhunters, stuff like that. I think this card can fit better into that deck, although I still don't know if you want to take a turn on turn 6 doing essentially nothing. But there also potentially exists a probably mostly meme version of a deck where you play maybe Gladiator's Arena, maybe Stormcloak Camp, maybe Sill, and maybe you could just burn your opponent down without really attacking. You use your creatures to control the board, and then you let your supports and your lane effect burn your opponent down continuously. Is that realistic to expect? Probably not, and for that reason I think this card is a little bit worse than the Mania lane overall. But maybe something pops up that makes this card a little bit better. But until then, I'd have to give this card like a 2 to 2.5 stars. The effect is obviously powerful. I just don't think at that Magicka cost it is as likely to work out. But I could easily be proven wrong if the right deck pops up for it to fit into. This next card was revealed by Shank today on his stream. We've got Drive Mad, the 4-cost action. A creature battles itself. So at first glance, you think this card is just absolute trash. Kind of like a, why would I not just run Fell the Mighty for 4-cost removal? And there may be some times where Fell the Mighty is better. But I think that this card has some solid uses. So a couple things to think about. Drain procs from this card on your turn. Only on your turn. So if you use it on an opponent's creature, for example, I think Justin on Twitter mentioned that Clockwork Scorpion is a great card that gets removed by this since it'll kill itself. And also, it will not drain for your opponent because you're activating on your turn, and drain only affects on your turn. Same with, I believe Slay effects will work that way as well. Since they won't be triggering the attack itself, so you don't have to worry about your opponent's Slay creatures. But you can kind of play into those synergies yourself. So this card, while obviously being more expensive than the Crossbow or the Sword of Inferno on something like a Falkreath Defiler, is a way to guarantee trigger your Defiler. So if you found a way to have like Brotherhood Sanctuaries up, I know these 3 colors don't exist together yet, but in a theoretical world, if you had Brotherhood Sanctuary plus Falkreath Defiler plus this card, you can guarantee yourselves to draw a bunch of cards, or to res a bunch of cards. Same thing in something like a Slay Archer. You can guarantee a bunch of Slay effects to trigger, which I think is pretty solid. And then on top of that, you've got your drains. Something like a Night Talonlord, if you could play that on turn... I think Night Talonlord costs 9, so if you had the ring or if you ramped once, you could play these 2 cards together, and you would heal for 8, as well as Night Talonlord reviving himself. So this is not a like blatantly obviously powerful card. I think this card takes a little bit of nuance and a little bit of skill to use to its best of its ability all the time. But you also have to realize there are going to be times where this card is just a worse Fell the Mighty, or even worse, it's a Fell the Mighty that can't remove something, which makes it kind of bad. But then there's also going to be times where you can have like a 3-attack creature weaken itself and you can trade into it, or a 3-attack creature kill itself, or any number of things. So this is one of those cards where sometimes it's going to be worse than Fell the Mighty, sometimes it's going to be better than Fell the Mighty, and sometimes you may run these 2 cards alongside each other. I think it just is going to come down to what the meta looks like, and if this card is more often better than Fell the Mighty, then you can probably see some decks running it in place of Fell the Mighty, although at the moment there's not a ton of decks that run Fell the Mighty anyway. So this could also just be a pretty decent arena card, depending on what your draft looks like, especially since it's a common. So I'd give this card like another 2.5 stars. I think it's a fine card. I think there's going to be some decks that can probably use this card pretty well. I just don't think it's quite strong enough to really push anything new on its own. I could maybe see the argument for bumping it up to 3 stars for some arena application, but I wouldn't go any higher than that, I don't think. And the final card we're going to talk about was revealed by, I think this is a Russian streamer, Don Pedro Mateo. I could be wrong. I have no idea what that language is. But the text is down below. It is called Unstable Madman, a 3-cost 2/2 it's a Nord. At the end of your turn, Unstable Madman gets +1/+1. Then, at the end of the turn, if he has 5 power or more, he changes into Unstoppable Berserker. And Unstoppable Berserker has the effect Breakthrough. At the end of your turn, gain +2/+2. So this is the kind of card where the goal, I'm sure, is just to kind of snowball. I think the biggest thing you're going to want to do is if you slap like a Steel Scimitar on this card, so it becomes essentially a 4 magic, a 4/4. At the end of your turn, he will gain +1/+1, and then he'll transform right away, which will make this card really, really good. The one thing to keep in mind, which I have to get confirmation on this, but I'm pretty sure the way this works is when he transforms, besides your item effects, I think he loses the buffs that he gave himself. I have to double check exactly how the way this card works. One way will make him absolutely crazy, and the other way will make him kind of item dependent. So we'll talk about both ways. The first way that he could work, and I'm not too sure on how the transform mechanic will work out, is he gains +1, he gains +1, he gains +1, and then he transforms back down to a 2/2 that has the new ability, and then he'll have to start transforming again before it starts mattering. If that's the way it works, it's still not a horrible card, but it's obviously a lot worse. But you can mitigate that pain from having like a Steel Scimitar, so that I know that when a creature transforms, it preserves the items on it. So even if it did go back down to a 2/2, the Steel Scimitar would make it so that it was a 1-turn transformation, and he'd be a 4/4 with that new ability, which I think makes it a lot more doable. And obviously, if he retains his +1/+1 and he transforms into essentially a 5/5 at the end of the day, then this card is just a crazy snowballing powerhouse, and you're going to want to keep Sorcerer's Negations on hand at all times. Either way, I think this card is a decent card for... obviously, a lot of red decks are more aggressive anyway, but I think this card is a solid card for wanting to snowball, getting this out on like a turn 2 or turn 3 with the ring, getting a Scimitar on it, something like that, and just kind of snowballing, getting the stat buffs going and going and going. And unless your opponent has like a Sorcerer's Negation, they probably have to spend like maybe 2 cards answering this unless they have hard removal, and then they don't have hard removal for your other better answers. So I think this card has a lot of snowball potential in either application of the way the transforming works. I think we could see this card. I think this card is absolutely insane in Arena, and I think it's probably pretty good and constructed. For that reason, I'd give this card like a solid 3 stars. I could see it bumped up to a 3.5, but a lot of the aggressive decks are pretty crowded as it is, so I think this card could struggle to find a home there. But I think this card is probably good enough to fight through anyway. The only issue at the moment being that Tribunal and Telvanni and Sorcerer are all really, really common right now, and all 3 of those decks run Sorcerer's Negation, so I think those 3 decks, with how popular they are at the moment, could be enough to kind of stifle this card quite a bit. But if the expansion launches and the meta shifts, and those 3 decks aren't as popular as they currently are, I think this deck gets a significant boost in power level compared to where I'm looking at it at the moment. So it could go from like a 2.5, 3 star, I'm saying 3 star, to maybe like a 3.5, maybe even 4 star, depending on how the meta works. But at the moment, I feel confident in saying this is about a 3-ish star card. But yeah, that's going to be it for now, guys. We've got more cards we'll talk about as they continue to trickle in. We are in full-on reveal season, so we'll probably have one of these videos going up daily talking about all the new cards revealed. Let me know what you guys think down below of all the cards. Let me know if you guys disagree with any of my assessments, any synergies that I may have missed. Let's get the conversation going down below in the comments section. But yeah, that's going to be it for now, guys. As always, thank you all very much for watching. I'm DragonTamerBlayde, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.